This book does not add to Scripture, replace it, or attempt to correct it. The Word of God is already complete. It does not need improvement, reinterpretation through systems, or reshaping to fit modern understanding. What is written stands exactly as it is. Yet something has happened in the way the Scriptures have been handled. Men have read what is written and then built layers around it. Plain things have been made complex. Connected things have been separated. What was meant to be seen clearly has often been filtered through traditions, institutions, and accepted explanations that, over time, have shaped how people think they understand the text. As a result, many can read the same words and walk away with completely different pictures. This book is not here to introduce a new interpretation. It is here to remove what has been placed in front of what is already written, so that the pattern within the text can be seen as it stands. We are not building a theological system. We are not following denominational teaching. We are not repeating what has already been said by others. Instead, we follow a simple but demanding approach. We look at what is written, what the words actually mean, what has already taken place, and what is happening now. These four elements are held together without forcing a conclusion ahead of time. There are two ways to approach Scripture. One begins with a conclusion and searches for verses to support it. The other begins with what is written and follows it carefully until the conclusion forms on its own. This book follows the second approach. As you read, nothing is rushed. The goal is not to persuade quickly, but to build carefully, line by line, connection by connection, until the pattern becomes visible without being forced. There are things written that many have read but not fully allowed to speak. There are descriptions that have been reduced into symbols without weight, and warnings that have been softened into ideas rather than realities. But the language of Scripture is not casual. When it describes power, it means power. When it describes kingdoms, it means kingdoms. When it describes destruction, it is not speaking in exaggeration. This matters because this is not simply about understanding prophecy. It is about seeing correctly. If what is written is not seen correctly, then everything built on top of it will be misaligned. You are not being asked to accept anything in advance. You are being asked to look carefully, to follow the structure, and to allow what is written to form its own clarity. Everything presented here must stand on four foundations: what is written, what the words mean, what has happened, and what is happening. If something cannot stand on all four, it does not belong. This is not written to argue or to win agreement. It is written so that once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. There is a pattern in the Scriptures. It has always been there. It was written from the beginning, it has been unfolding through history, and it continues into the present. We are not adding to the Word. We are following it. The story hidden in plain sight. There is a consistent story that runs through the Scriptures, but it is often overlooked because it is not presented in a single location. Instead, it is built across multiple books, written at different times, and expressed through different forms. When these parts are read separately, they can appear disconnected. When they are read together, a pattern begins to emerge. Many approach the Bible as a collection of individual teachings, prophecies, and historical accounts. While each element stands on its own, they were not given in isolation. What is described in one place is often confirmed in another. What is shown symbolically in one passage is explained more directly elsewhere. The repetition that appears across different books is not redundancy, it is reinforcement. This is how Scripture establishes truth. It does not rely on a single statement. It builds a matter through multiple witnesses until the structure becomes clear. Within this structure, a recurring pattern appears. Different passages describe the same type of opposition to God. Different writings point to the same kind of authority, the same kind of deception, and the same kind of conflict with those who follow him. These are not separate ideas. They are different angles of the same reality. At the same time, another pattern runs alongside it. There are those who claim to follow God but do not do what he says. This is not presented as a minor issue. It is central to understanding what develops later. The focus is often placed on identifying something openly opposed to God, something obvious, external, and clearly defined. However, the Scriptures repeatedly point to something more subtle and more dangerous, a condition in which people associate themselves with God, speak in his name, and yet do not walk in what he has said. This distinction is critical because the later developments described in Scripture do not appear in isolation. They grow out of an existing condition, before anything is revealed openly, before any system stands in full form, and before any individual rises into clear authority. There is already a foundation in place. That foundation is a separation between what is heard and what is done. Truth is present. It is spoken, repeated, and recognized, but it is not consistently followed. This creates an environment where words carry weight in appearance but not in action. Over time, this gap allows something else to develop. Deception does not begin by removing truth entirely. It begins by allowing truth to remain while weakening its authority over how people live. Once that condition is established, it becomes possible for something larger to form without immediate resistance. This is why the progression matters. The end is not introduced suddenly. It is built step by step. What appears later is the result of what has already been working. The scriptures show this movement clearly. First, the underlying influence, then the visible structure, and finally the individual who stands at the center of it. If the first stage is not recognized, the later stages will not be understood correctly. What seems sudden will actually be the continuation of something long in motion. For that reason, the starting point cannot be the final events. It must be what is already present. Only then can the rest of the pattern be seen without confusion. The Spirit already at work. Before anything is revealed openly, before a man stands in a position of authority, and before any system reaches its full expression, the scriptures make it clear that something is already in motion. It is not introduced suddenly at the end, nor does it appear without warning. It begins earlier, working in a way that is present but not always recognized. The Bible does not begin this part of the story with a visible ruler. It begins with a condition described as a spirit already active in the world. This is stated directly, not as a future possibility but as a current reality. There are already many who carry this influence, and their presence is used as evidence that the time is moving toward its conclusion. This matters because it shifts the starting point. Instead of looking first for a singular figure or a fully formed system, the attention is drawn to something less obvious but more foundational. What appears later is not separate from what exists now. It grows out of it. This working is also described as a mystery already in operation. The term mystery does not mean it is unknowable, but that it is not immediately seen for what it is. It operates in a way that does not always draw attention to itself, yet its effects are present. Because of this, a common mistake is to expect something entirely new to appear at the end. The assumption is that what comes will be unlike anything before it, clearly different and easily identified. However, the scriptures present the opposite. What is revealed later is the continuation and exposure of what has already been developing. For that reason, recognizing the pattern now is essential. If the underlying influence is not understood in its current form, it will not be recognized when it becomes more visible. The description of this spirit is not first defined by political power or global authority. It is defined by its relationship to truth. Specifically, it is connected to denial of what is true concerning the Messiah and the nature of his coming. This establishes the foundation. The issue is not initially external control, but distortion or rejection of truth. This denial does not always appear as direct opposition. It is not limited to open rejection or hostility. In many cases, it is far more subtle. It can exist in environments that appear close to truth, that speak in familiar language, and that maintain a form of alignment on the surface. This is where the distinction becomes important. Denial is not only expressed through what is said, it is also revealed through contradiction between what is spoken and what is lived. A person can affirm something verbally while their actions move in a different direction. In that sense, truth can be present in words but absent in practice. This connects directly to a pattern already established in Scripture: hearing without doing. The issue is not a lack of access to truth, but a lack of alignment with it. Words are known, repeated, and even defended, yet they do not shape behavior in a consistent way. When this condition becomes widespread, it creates an environment where deception can develop without immediate resistance. Truth remains in circulation, but its authority is weakened. People can believe they are standing in what is right while remaining out of alignment with it. Because of this, the instruction to test what is presented becomes necessary. Not everything that appears correct is aligned with what is written. The appearance of truth is not the same as its reality. This condition is not described as rare or isolated. It is described as widespread. There are many who operate within this pattern. not just a single example. This indicates that the influence is not confined to one place or group. It spreads, it multiplies, and it establishes a broad foundation. Over time, what exists in many forms begins to move toward a more unified expression. The progression is consistent. First the underlying influence, then the development of structure, and eventually the emergence of a central figure. This sequence is critical. The Spirit prepares the environment. It establishes what is accepted, what is normalized, and what is no longer questioned. Once that foundation is in place, the transition to a visible system becomes far easier. When that system is established, the appearance of a single figure at its center no longer seems out of place. For this reason, the beginning cannot be ignored. The later stages do not stand independently. They are built on what has already been working. The man who is eventually revealed is not the starting point of the story. He is the result of a process that has been unfolding over time. Understanding this removes the idea that the final events will arrive without warning or preparation. Instead, it shows that the groundwork is already present, shaping the conditions in which those events will occur. What is now unseen for what it is will later become visible. What is now accepted without question will later be enforced. What is now operating in many will later be concentrated in one. Because of that, the focus must remain where the scriptures begin, with what is already at work. Only from that point can the next stage be understood clearly, without confusion or assumption. The difference between the Spirit and the man. A clear distinction must be made at this point, because confusion here will affect everything that follows. The scriptures describe both an influence already at work and a specific individual who is revealed later. These are connected, but they are not the same. If they are treated as the same, the progression is lost. What should be seen as a development becomes blurred into a single idea, and the order established in the text is broken. The Spirit is described as already present. It operates across many, not through one. It influences thinking, behavior, and alignment with truth. It prepares a condition in which certain patterns become normal and widely accepted. This is why it is described in the plural as well as the singular. There are many expressions of it, all sharing the same underlying nature. The man, however, is described differently. He is not many, he is singular. He is not already revealed, he is held back, and then revealed at a specific point in time. This introduces a timing element that does not apply to the Spirit in the same way. This distinction shows that the man does not begin the process. He enters into something that has already been prepared. There is also a clear statement that something restrains him until the proper moment. This restraint indicates that his appearance is not random. It is controlled, and it occurs only when a certain condition is reached. The presence of restraint also confirms that the man is not yet operating in his full role, even though the influence connected to him is already active. At the same time, the influence described earlier continues to develop. It does not pause, it continues shaping the environment into which the man will eventually step. By the time he is revealed, the groundwork has already been laid. This is important because it explains why the transition does not meet immediate resistance. If the pattern were entirely new, it would be obvious. But because it grows out of what is already accepted, it appears consistent with what people have already become familiar with. The scriptures also describe the character of this man in a way that reflects the influence that precedes him. He opposes and elevates himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. He places himself in a position that belongs to God alone and presents himself as if he holds that authority. This is not simply a political action. It is a direct expression of the same denial that defines the Spirit. What existed in many as misalignment with truth becomes fully expressed in one who openly takes the place of God. There is also a connection to power that goes beyond natural ability. His coming is associated with signs, wonders, and deception. These are not neutral displays. They serve to support what is false and to persuade those who are already inclined away from truth. This again ties back to the earlier condition. Those who do not have a firm alignment with what is true are more susceptible to what appears convincing. The groundwork laid by the Spirit makes the deception of the man effective. The relationship between the two can be understood as preparation and fulfillment. The Spirit prepares the environment, shaping what is accepted and how truth is handled. The man fulfills that pattern, bringing it into a visible and concentrated form. This progression is not optional. It is necessary. Without preparation, the appearance of such a figure would be rejected. With preparation, it becomes possible for him to be received. This also clarifies why the scriptures do not begin with the man. Starting with the final stage would leave the earlier development unexplained. By establishing the presence of the influence first, the text provides the context needed to understand how the later stage becomes possible. It also explains why recognition becomes difficult. If someone looks only for a single figure without understanding the pattern that precedes him, they may overlook the conditions that make his appearance possible. By the time he is revealed, the environment that supports him will already be in place. The distinction between the spirit and the man therefore serves two purposes. It preserves the order of events, and it provides a way to recognize the progression as it unfolds. The influence is already present, shaping behavior and belief. The structure that grows from it will begin to take visible form. The individual who embodies it fully will then appear within that structure. Each stage depends on the one before it. Because of that, the focus must remain on the sequence. Skipping ahead breaks the connection. Following the order allows the pattern to be seen clearly. The movement does not stop with the distinction between influence and individual. The next stage introduces something that carries both elements forward into a visible expression. The scriptures describe this as a system that holds power, interacts with nations, and operates on a global level. To understand what follows, that system must be examined carefully, using the same approach: what is written, what the words mean, what has happened, and what is happening. Only then can its role in the progression be seen without distortion. Mountains, waters, and the structure of power. As the pattern continues to develop, the language of Scripture begins to describe something more structured and visible. The focus shifts from an underlying influence to a form that interacts with the world at a larger scale. This transition is not described in modern political terms, but through imagery that carries consistent meaning across multiple passages. To understand what is being shown, those terms must be read the way Scripture uses them, not the way they are commonly assumed. One of the primary descriptions given is that of mountains. These are not introduced as simple geographic references, but as symbols tied to authority and rule. In several places, mountains are used to represent kingdoms or seats of power, places from which influence is established and extended. This meaning is reinforced when the same imagery is used alongside kings and dominion, linking physical description with governing authority. This becomes especially important in passages that describe multiple mountains connected to a single entity. The description is not casual, it is deliberate, and it carries both a physical and a structural implication. The language allows for a real location, but it also communicates something about the nature of power associated with it. At the same time, another term is introduced: waters. These are defined directly within the text itself. The waters are said to represent peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. This removes uncertainty about their meaning. The description is not symbolic without explanation. It is interpreted within the same passage. When these two elements are placed together, a clearer picture begins to form. There is a structure associated with authority, and it is connected to a broad population base that spans across different groups and regions. The relationship between the two indicates influence that extends beyond a single isolated location. The text then introduces a woman who is positioned in relation to both. She is described as sitting on the waters and associated with the mountains. This placement is not incidental. It indicates a connection to both the people and the structure of power. She is not separate from them. She is linked to them in a way that suggests influence and interaction. This is further clarified by another statement. She is described as a great city that reigns over the kings of the earth. This connects the imagery directly to governance and authority. The description moves from symbolic language to a more direct identification, tying the figure to something that operates in the real world. At this point, several elements are established together. There is a structure of power, represented through mountains. There is a broad population base, represented through waters, and there is a central entity, described as a woman, that is connected to both and exercises influence over rulers. This combination cannot be reduced to a single simple definition without losing part of what is being shown. It is not only a location, and it is not only a system, it carries aspects of both. It has identifiable presence, and it has extended reach. Because of this, attempts to limit the description to only one aspect often fall short. Focusing only on geography ignores the scope of influence. Focusing only on influence ignores the specificity of the description. The text holds both together. This is where careful observation becomes necessary. The goal is not to assign a name prematurely, but to understand the requirements described. What is being presented must match the characteristics given: connection to multiple centers of power, influence over a wide range of peoples, and interaction with the kings of the earth. The progression also shows that this entity is not passive. It participates in relationships with rulers, described in terms that indicate alliance, influence, and exchange. This interaction contributes to its position and its reach. At the same time, there are indicators of wealth, appearance, and presentation. The description includes elements of luxury, status, and outward display. These are not minor details. They contribute to understanding how this entity is perceived and how it operates. Taken together, the picture is one of a powerful and influential presence that stands at the intersection of authority and population, interacting with leaders and shaping outcomes at a broad level. This stage of the pattern shows something that is no longer hidden. It is visible, active, and established. However, it is still part of a progression. It does not represent the final form, but a significant step toward it. What follows will build on this structure. The description will move from what this entity is and how it operates, to what it claims about itself and how it is eventually judged. The next step is to look more closely at this central figure, how it presents itself, how it is described in greater detail, and what ultimately happens to it. The woman who rules kings. The description of the woman is one of the most detailed and deliberate presentations in the scriptures, and it cannot be understood correctly if it is reduced too quickly into a single idea. The language used is layered, but it is not unclear. Each part adds to the picture, and when those parts are held together, the structure becomes difficult to ignore. She is first introduced in connection with both the waters and the mountains. This establishes her position immediately. She is not separate from the peoples of the earth, and she is not outside of the structures of power. She is placed in relation to both, indicating that her influence moves across populations and into the realm of rulers. This is then made more direct. She is described as a great city that reigns over the kings of the earth. This statement removes any uncertainty about her level of influence. She is not simply present among nations, she has authority that affects those who rule them. The nature of her relationship with these kings is also defined. It is described as a form of partnership that involves exchange, alignment, and shared interest. The language used points to influence that is both political and relational. She does not operate in isolation. She interacts with leadership across the earth in a way that shapes outcomes. At the same time, her appearance is described in terms that emphasize wealth, status, and presentation. She is arrayed in colors associated with authority and prominence. She is adorned with gold, precious stones, and costly materials. These details are not given for decoration. They show how she presents herself and how she is perceived. There is also an emphasis on abundance and luxury. The descriptions extend beyond appearance into the resources connected to her. This indicates not only wealth, but a system that supports and distributes it. Her influence is not limited to authority alone. It includes economic reach. However, the description does not stop with outward appearance. It also addresses her internal condition and her actions. She is associated with corruption and unfaithfulness, expressed through language that indicates a departure from what is right, while maintaining a form that appears aligned. This is where the earlier pattern becomes important. The issue is not only external opposition but contradiction. There is an alignment in appearance but a misalignment in reality. This reflects the same condition described before: the presence of form without corresponding obedience. The text also states that she is responsible for the blood of those who belong to God. This is not a minor detail. It connects her directly to persecution. Her influence is not neutral. It results in harm to those who remain aligned with what is true. This combination of elements, authority, wealth, influence over rulers, outward appearance, internal corruption, and involvement in persecution, creates a complex but consistent picture. Each part reinforces the others. There is also a statement regarding her perception of herself. She sees herself as secure, established, and beyond loss. This sense of stability is not based on a temporary condition in her own view. It is presented as something she believes will continue. This self-perception is significant because it contrasts with what is later described. The confidence she holds becomes part of the setup for what follows. It shows that her fall is not expected from within her own position. At this stage, the pattern has moved from an unseen influence to a visible and established presence that operates at a global level. The woman represents a central point where power, wealth, and influence converge. However, the progression does not end with her position. What is established will not remain unchanged. The same structure that supports her will later turn against her. This introduces a shift that cannot be understood without recognizing what has already been built. Her connections to kings, to systems of wealth, and to the broader population are not only part of her strength, they also play a role in what happens next. The description that follows does not show a gradual decline, it shows a decisive change. Those who are connected to her do not remain aligned with her indefinitely. The next step is to examine that shift, how the relationships that define her position become the means of her destruction, and what that reveals about the structure itself. The woman who says, "I sit a queen," the description of the woman does not rely only on how she is seen from the outside. At a certain point, the text reveals how she sees herself. This shift is important because it moves from observation to internal perspective. What she says about her own position exposes the foundation she is standing on. She declares that she sits as a queen and will not see sorrow. This is not a casual statement, it expresses certainty, stability, and a belief that her position is secure. There is no indication in her words that she expects interruption, loss, or judgment. Her confidence is not partial, it is complete. This statement must be read in light of everything already established about her. She is connected to rulers across the earth, surrounded by wealth, and positioned at the center of influence. From that vantage point, her confidence appears justified. Her surroundings reinforce her conclusion. However, the scriptures do not present this statement as truth. They present it as her perception. The distinction between what is believed and what is real becomes critical at this stage. Her confidence is not built on alignment with what is right. It is built on what she sees as unshakable position. The same structure that gives her influence also gives her a sense of permanence. Because her connections are extensive and her reach is wide, she assumes that her position cannot be overturned. This is where the earlier pattern returns again. The issue is not simply power, but misalignment. The presence of strength does not guarantee correctness. The appearance of stability does not ensure continuation. There is also an implied separation between what she claims and what is actually taking place. While she declares that she will not see sorrow, the text has already connected her to actions that carry consequence. Her involvement in corruption and in the harm of those who belong to God is not without result. This creates tension within the description. On one side, there is her confidence. On the other, there is the reality of what is building toward judgment. This tension is intentional. It shows that her understanding of her own position is incomplete. She sees her strength, but she does not account for what is set against her. The language also reflects a form of self-elevation. To sit as a queen is to claim authority, position, and permanence. It places her in a role that assumes continuation without challenge. This aligns with the broader pattern of elevating oneself beyond what is rightfully held. At the same time, her statement reveals that she does not anticipate accountability. The absence of expected sorrow suggests that she does not believe her actions will lead to consequence. This is not simply confidence, it is a form of blindness to what is coming. This blindness is not unique to her. It reflects a broader pattern in which individuals or systems measure their condition by what they currently possess rather than by their alignment with what is true. When evaluation is based only on present strength, future consequence is overlooked. The scriptures do not leave this statement unchallenged. They immediately contrast it with what will occur. The declaration of security is followed by a description of sudden change. What she believes will not happen is exactly what takes place. This contrast serves a purpose. It shows that her confidence is not only misplaced, but directly opposed to what is about to unfold. The certainty she expresses becomes the backdrop against which her fall is revealed. At this stage in the progression, everything appears stable from her perspective. Her influence is intact, her relationships with rulers are active, and her position is established. Nothing in her statement suggests awareness of change. However, the pattern does not remain in this condition. What has been built is about to be disrupted in a way that is not gradual or partial. The next step does not introduce uncertainty. It introduces certainty of a different kind, the certainty of judgment. What follows will not develop slowly over time. It will occur in a manner that contrasts sharply with her expectation of permanence. To understand what happens next, the focus must shift from how she sees herself to what is determined for her. The same structure that supports her will not remain aligned with her. The change will come from within the system she is connected to. This is where the progression turns. The day she falls, the shift that follows is not gradual. It does not unfold slowly over time. The scriptures describe a sudden and decisive change that stands in direct contrast to the woman's own declaration of security. She had said in her heart, "I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow." Revelation 18:7. Yet what happens next overturns that confidence completely. Revelation 17:16, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled." The same kings who had committed fornication with her and lived in luxury alongside her now turn against her. The beast and the 10 horns act together. They strip her, make her desolate, consume her, and burn her with fire. This is not a slow decline or a partial weakening, it is complete and final. The destruction is not carried out by an outside enemy that suddenly appears. It comes from within the very system she had been riding. Those who once supported her position become the instruments of her removal. God sovereignly puts this hatred in agreement in their hearts, so that his words will be fulfilled. Revelation 18:8, "Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, and mourning, and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire. For strong is the Lord God who judgeth her." Revelation 18:9, 10, 17, 19, "And the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her, and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And every shipmaster, and all the company in ships, and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? For in 1 hour is she made desolate. The fall is sudden and visible. The kings, merchants, and those who traded by sea stand at a distance in fear. They do not come near. They mourn the loss, repeating the same cry, Alas, alas, that great city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. What had taken centuries to build is removed in 1 hour. Why she is destroyed. What the text actually says: she is judged for her luxury and self-glorification, Revelation 18:7. She is drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus, Revelation 17:6, 18:24. She committed spiritual prostitution with the kings of the earth, Revelation 17:2. Her destruction is not random, it is judgment. God allows the beast and the kings to turn on her because her pride, luxury, unfaithfulness, and persecution of the saints have reached their full measure. This moment is the midpoint of the 7 years. The covenant is broken, the abomination of desolation is set up in the Jerusalem temple, and the man of sin is revealed. The woman's removal clears the way for the beast to exercise undivided authority for the final 42 months. Her fall does not end the overall system, it changes it. What remains after she is burned is a more direct and concentrated form of power, no longer shared with her influence, but fully submitted to the beast. The woman who once rode the beast in strength is gone. The kings who once partnered with her now give their kingdom to the beast. The structure continues, but without her. This is the decisive turning point in the progression. What her fall reveals. The destruction of the woman is not only an event, it is a revelation. The scriptures do not simply record that she falls. They surround the event with the reactions of those who witness it. These responses reveal what her fall truly means. Revelation 18:9, 10, "And the kings of the earth, who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her, and lament for her, when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. Revelation 18:17-19. And every shipmaster, and all the company in ships, and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off, and cried when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like unto this great city? For in 1 hour is she made desolate. The kings, merchants, and those who trade by sea stand at a distance in fear. They do not approach. They mourn the loss, repeating the same cry, Alas, alas, that great city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. What had taken centuries to build is removed in 1 hour. Their mourning reveals 3 important truths. First, her influence was not limited to one area. It reached kings, merchants, and global trade. Her fall disrupts multiple layers at once: authority, economy, and commerce. Second, the destruction is sudden and complete. The repeated phrase, in 1 hour, emphasizes that her collapse is not gradual, it is swift and total. Third, those connected to her feel the loss deeply, yet they remain at a distance. This shows that her fall is not only destructive but also dangerous. The event creates fear and separation. At the same time, another response is recorded in Scripture. While those who benefited from her mourn, heaven is called to rejoice. Revelation 18:20. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God hath avenged you on her. This contrast is deliberate. Those who gained from her power mourn. Those who suffered under her are told to rejoice. Her fall is not merely political or economic. It is judgment for the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. Revelation 17:6, 18:24. The fall of the woman is therefore both a collapse and a judgment. It removes a central part of the system, but the system itself does not disappear. The kings remain, the beast remains, authority remains. What changes is the balance of power. Her removal clears the way for the beast to exercise undivided authority in the final 42 months. What was once shared is now concentrated. What was once filtered through her influence now operates more directly. This is the decisive turning point. The woman who once rode the beast in strength is gone. The structure continues, but without her. The system without the woman. The removal of the woman does not end the structure described in the Scriptures. This is one of the most important transitions in the entire pattern. When she is destroyed, the kings remain. The beast remains. Authority remains. What changes is not the existence of the structure, but its composition and direction. This distinction must be held carefully. If the woman is mistaken for the entire system, then her fall would appear to be the end, but the text does not present it that way. Instead, it shows that the system continues forward after she is gone. Before her destruction, she is closely connected to the kings of the earth. She influences them, interacts with them, and is described as reigning over them. There is a shared relationship in which her position is supported by those around her. However, this relationship does not remain stable. The same kings who were aligned with her turn against her. This shift is decisive. They act together, and their actions result in her complete removal. Once that occurs, the shared structure changes. What was previously divided between the woman and the kings is no longer divided. The kings, along with the beast, now operate without her presence. The balance of influence that once existed is gone, and the system moves forward in a different form. This reveals something about her role. She was not the origin of the power. She was connected to it, benefited from it, and influenced it, but she did not replace it. When she is removed, the underlying structure does not collapse with her. It continues. This is why her destruction is a transition rather than a conclusion. At this stage, the system becomes more direct. The shared influence that once existed gives way to a more concentrated expression of authority. The complexity of multiple interacting elements is reduced, and what remains begins to stand more openly. The Scriptures then shift focus back to the beast. Without the presence of the woman, the attention is no longer divided. The beast is no longer operating alongside her influence. It stands in a position that is clearer and more exposed. This is where the progression tightens. Before this point, the system includes multiple layers: spiritual influence, structural authority, and the woman's role within it. After her removal, those layers begin to converge into a more unified expression. The absence of the woman removes a form of mediation within the system. What remains is more direct, more centralized, and less concealed. This also affects how the world interacts with it. Previously, the woman's presence shaped how authority, wealth, and influence were experienced. Her removal changes that dynamic. The system is no longer filtered through her position. It begins to operate in a way that reflects its underlying nature more openly. This does not mean that everything becomes immediately obvious. The progression still unfolds, but the direction is now set toward a more visible and concentrated form of control. The text shows that authority is given to the beast in a way that extends across nations, peoples, and languages. This authority is not new, but it becomes more clearly defined in this stage. At the same time, the conditions that were prepared earlier, through the Spirit already at work, are now fully in place. The environment has been shaped, the structure has been established, and the woman has been removed. All of this leads to the next development. A single figure moves into the center of what remains. This is where the distinction made earlier becomes essential. The Spirit prepared, the system developed. Now the man is revealed within that system. He does not appear into something empty. He steps into a structure that is already functioning and now stands without the woman who once occupied a central role within it. This explains why his emergence is effective. The framework is already in place. Authority is already established. The world is already conditioned to accept what follows. The progression is now at a point where the final stages begin to take form. What was once distributed across many is now brought into one. What was once partially concealed is now moving toward full visibility. The system continues, but it does not remain the same. It becomes more direct, more centralized, and more demanding. This is where the man enters fully into view, the man who exalts himself. The progression that has been building now reaches a point of concentration. What began as an influence developed into a structure and continued through a system now comes into focus through a single individual. This man does not appear at the beginning of the pattern. He emerges after the groundwork has already been laid. The scriptures describe him in direct terms. He is revealed at a specific time, not gradually introduced. His appearance is connected to a prior condition in which something restraining him is removed. This detail establishes that his emergence is not random. It occurs within a defined sequence. He is identified by his actions and his position. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. This is not limited to disagreement or opposition at a distance. It is an active elevation of himself into a place that belongs to God alone. This is further clarified by his relationship to the temple. He is described as sitting in the temple of God, presenting himself as God. This is not symbolic language that can be reduced to a general idea. It describes a direct claim, made in a specific setting, that places him at the center of worship. This action aligns with what has already been established. The spirit that operates before him is defined by denial of truth. The system that develops around that spirit normalizes misalignment. When the man appears, that same pattern reaches its full expression. What was once present in many as contradiction becomes openly declared in one who openly takes the place of God. There is also a clear statement regarding the source of his power. His coming is connected to the activity of Satan, accompanied by signs, wonders, and deception. These are not neutral displays. They serve to support what is false and to persuade those who are not aligned with truth. This connection explains why his influence is effective. The groundwork laid by the Spirit and the system has already prepared the environment. By the time he appears, the conditions that allow deception to take hold are already present. The scriptures also describe the scope of his authority. It extends across peoples, languages, and nations. This is not a localized rule. It is presented as a reach that affects the world broadly. This authority is not only exercised through governance, it also involves the response of those under it. The text describes a level of recognition and reaction that goes beyond simple compliance. There is a form of admiration and acceptance that accompanies his rise. This again ties back to what has been prepared. If the environment were not already conditioned, such a response would be unlikely. The progression explains why it becomes possible. There is also a time frame associated with his rule. It is described as lasting for a defined period. This detail shows that his authority, while extensive, is not indefinite. It exists within a limit. At the same time, his actions include direct opposition to those who remain aligned with God. He is given the ability to make war against them and to overcome them. This introduces a level of conflict that moves beyond influence into direct confrontation. This conflict is not accidental. It is part of the role he fulfills. The same pattern that began with misalignment now results in open opposition. The man therefore represents the full expression of what has been developing. He embodies the denial, the elevation of self, the use of power to deceive, and the opposition to those who remain aligned with what is true. This is why the distinction between the spirit and the man is necessary. Without it, his role would appear disconnected. With it, his position becomes the natural outcome of the progression. He does not stand alone in the system, but he stands at its center. At this stage, the structure is fully active. The woman has been removed, the system remains, and the man now occupies the central position within it. However, the progression is not complete. The scriptures introduce another figure who operates alongside him. This figure does not replace him, but supports him. His role is not to take authority for himself, but to direct attention and allegiance toward the man. This introduces a new layer to the system, one that combines authority with persuasion in a more direct way. To understand how the system reaches its full expression, this second figure must be examined, the one who makes the world follow. The appearance of the man does not complete the structure. It brings it into focus, but it does not yet explain how the entire world is drawn into alignment with him. For that, another figure is introduced, one whose role is not to replace authority but to direct it. This second figure is described in a way that immediately presents a contrast. He appears with characteristics that suggest something gentle or familiar, yet his speech reveals something entirely different. This contrast is not incidental. It is part of how he operates. His authority is not independent. It is exercised in connection with the first. He does not establish a separate rule. He functions within the presence of the man, using the authority associated with him to influence others. This shows that his role is supportive, but not passive. The primary function assigned to him is clear. He causes the earth and those who dwell in it to direct their allegiance toward the man. This is not presented as a suggestion or an invitation. It is described as something that is brought about, an action that results in a specific outcome. This introduces a new level of control within the system. Up to this point, authority has been established and recognized. Now it is actively enforced. The method used to accomplish this is also described. He performs signs that are visible and convincing. These are not minor acts. They are presented in a way that captures attention and creates credibility. The purpose of these signs is not neutral. They are used to support a specific direction, to lead people toward the man. This again connects to the earlier pattern. Deception is not introduced without preparation. It builds on what has already been accepted. The presence of signs and wonders reinforces what people are already inclined to follow. There is also a direct connection between these signs and the response of those who witness them. The text states that through these actions, those who dwell on the earth are deceived. This deception is not accidental. It is the intended result. The role of this second figure goes further. He directs the creation of an image connected to the man. This image is not described as a simple representation. It is given a form of presence that allows it to function within the system. It becomes a focal point for the response that is required. This introduces a visible element that ties allegiance to something that can be seen and interacted with. The system is no longer abstract. It is expressed in a form that people can engage with directly. The requirement that follows is absolute. Those who do not align with what is being established face consequences. This moves the system from influence into enforcement. There is no neutral position presented. A response is required, and that response is monitored. This is where the structure reaches a new level of intensity. Authority, persuasion, and enforcement are now working together. The man stands at the center. The second figure directs attention toward him and ensures that the response is carried out. The system is no longer operating through influence alone. It now includes mechanisms that require participation. This is further demonstrated through the introduction of a mark. This mark is connected to identity and participation within the system. It is not optional for those who wish to continue functioning within normal activity. It becomes a condition for buying and selling. This detail shows that the system extends into daily life. It is not limited to belief or acknowledgement. It reaches into practical existence, how people obtain what they need, and how they interact within society. The result is a structure that integrates authority, belief, and economic participation into a single framework. The separation between these areas is removed. To function within the system, alignment with it becomes necessary. This is the full expression of what has been building. The Spirit prepared the condition. The system developed the structure. The man stands at the center. The second figure enforces the response. Together, they form a unified operation that reaches across the world. At this point, the progression has reached a stage where there is little ambiguity left. What was once less visible is now clear. What was once optional becomes required. However, this does not mean that everything moves without resistance. There are those who do not align with what is being established. Their presence introduces conflict into the system. The same structure that requires participation also responds to those who refuse it. This is where the next stage becomes visible. The system does not only enforce alignment, it also confronts those who do not comply, those who will not bow. By this stage, the structure is no longer subtle. Authority has been established, allegiance is being directed, and participation is enforced through both persuasion and necessity. The system now reaches into belief, identity, and daily survival. It leaves little room for neutrality. Yet the scriptures do not present a world of total agreement. Even at this level of control, there are those who do not align with what is being required. These are not described as people who are unaware or uninformed. They are defined by their response. They do not accept what is being established, even when refusal carries consequence. Their position is not based on convenience or circumstance, but on alignment with what is true. This distinction becomes critical because it introduces direct conflict into the system. Up to this point, the progression has shown preparation, development, and enforcement. Now it shows resistance. The presence of those who will not bow exposes the nature of the system more clearly than anything else. If alignment were voluntary alone, refusal would not create pressure. But the text shows that refusal does not pass without response. The same structure that requires allegiance also reacts against those who do not give it. This reaction is described in direct terms. The man is given authority to make war against those who belong to God and to overcome them. This is not symbolic language of disagreement, it is conflict that results in real consequence. The scope of this conflict is also important. It is not limited to a single place or group. The authority connected to the system extends across peoples, languages, and nations. This means that the pressure faced by those who refuse is not isolated, it is widespread. At the same time, the system is structured in such a way that refusal carries practical consequences. The requirement connected to the mark affects buying and selling. This means that those who do not align are not only facing opposition from authority, but are also restricted in their ability to function within normal life. This creates a layered form of pressure. There is external opposition, and there is internal limitation. Both work together to make refusal difficult. The presence of this pressure reveals something about the nature of allegiance within the system. It is not based solely on belief or agreement, it is reinforced through necessity. To participate fully in society, alignment becomes required. This is where the earlier preparation becomes fully visible. A world conditioned to accept misalignment with truth is more easily brought into a system that requires outward conformity. What began as a separation between what is heard and what is done now results in a structure that demands both outward and inward alignment with what is false. Those who refuse stand outside of that structure. Their position is not defined by what they oppose alone, but by what they remain aligned with. They continue to hold to what is written, even when the cost increases. This is why their presence creates tension within the system. They represent a point that cannot be absorbed or redirected. Their refusal exposes the limits of the system's control. The text does not present their situation as easy or temporary. It acknowledges the reality of what they face. There is endurance required. There is faith required. The language used indicates that what they experience is not brief or light. At the same time, their position is not described as defeat in the final sense. While they may be overcome within the system, their alignment with what is true is not reversed. The distinction between outward circumstance and inward alignment remains. This introduces a contrast that runs through the entire pattern. The system holds visible authority and enforces participation, but it does not ultimately define what is true. Those who refuse do not hold power within the system, but they remain aligned with what is written. This contrast is intentional. It shows that the progression is not only about control, but about testing alignment. By this point, the system has reached its full expression. Authority is centralized, allegiance is enforced, and resistance is confronted. The environment that was prepared from the beginning has now produced its complete form. However, the pattern does not end here. The system that has been established does not continue indefinitely without interruption. What has been built reaches a point where it encounters something it cannot control. The same authority that allowed the system to develop also sets a limit to it. This introduces the next stage, where the focus shifts from what is happening on the earth to what is directed toward it. When judgment begins to fall, up to this point, everything that has unfolded has developed within the realm of what man builds, what man believes, and what man enforces. Influence became structure, structure became authority, and authority became a system that reached into every part of life. The man stood at the center of it. The one beside him ensured that allegiance was carried out, and the world, already prepared, moved into alignment under pressure that touched both belief and survival. Nothing about it was hidden anymore. It was visible, structured, and operating at full strength. But the pattern does not end with what is built on the earth. There is a shift, and it does not come from within the system. It comes from above it. The scriptures begin to describe something that does not rise but is released. What had been allowed to develop now begins to be answered, not with confusion or delay, but with order and purpose. The language changes from what man establishes to what God sends, and that change reveals a boundary that the system cannot cross. The first movements are not subtle. They touch the earth itself. Hail and fire, mixed with blood, are cast down, and the result is immediate. The ground is affected, what grows from it is damaged, and what sustains life begins to fail. This is not distant or symbolic. It is direct, physical, and undeniable. The stability that supported daily life is struck at its root. Then the sea is affected. Something like a great burning mass is cast into it, and the impact spreads through what lives within it and what depends on it. The waters are changed. Life within them is lost, and the systems tied to them begin to break. Trade, movement, and the structures that relied on the sea no longer function as they did before. What once connected nations begins to collapse under the weight of what is happening. The pattern continues as the sources of fresh water are struck. Rivers and springs, what people depend on to live, are changed. What was once sustaining becomes bitter, and what was once life-giving becomes harmful. This is not an inconvenience. It is a direct interruption of survival itself. The very things that people rely on without question are no longer secure. Even the heavens are affected. The light that marks time and order is reduced, and the rhythm that governed day and night is disturbed. What had always been constant begins to shift. The world itself no longer behaves as it once did, and the sense of control that the system appeared to have begins to unravel. None of this is random. Each step touches something foundational: land, sea, water, light. The structure that supported the system is being struck in layers, and with each layer, the illusion of control is exposed. The system still stands. The authority is still present, and enforcement is still in place, but it is now operating within a world that is no longer stable. This reveals something that could not be seen before. The authority of man extends only so far. It can govern people, enforce participation, and control movement within society, but it does not extend over creation itself. When creation is struck, the system has no answer. As the progression continues, the intensity increases. What begins as disruption moves into direct suffering. The text describes torment that does not immediately end life, but brings distress that cannot be ignored. It is experienced, felt, and recognized, and it adds another layer to what is unfolding across the earth. Yet even here, something more is revealed, not through the events themselves, but through the response to them. Those who experience these things do not turn, they do not change direction, they continue in the same alignment that was already established. This is not due to lack of clarity. It confirms that what has been building from the beginning has now become fixed. The separation between what is heard and what is done is no longer a subtle condition. It has become a permanent one. The judgments continue in sequence, each one increasing in impact, each one removing another layer of what once appeared stable. And still, the system remains. Authority is still exercised, allegiance is still enforced, and the structure continues to operate within a world that is breaking around it. This shows that what is happening is not immediate removal, but exposure. Everything that has been built is now being tested against something it cannot control, and that test reveals its limits. By this point, the world is no longer what it was. What once supported the system is unstable. What once seemed secure is uncertain, and what once appeared unshakable is being shaken. Yet the progression is not finished, because what is taking place is not only affecting the earth, it is moving towards something final. The same powers that stood, enforced, and resisted are now being drawn together, not by accident, but toward a specific end. The pattern is no longer just unfolding, it is converging, the gathering of nations. As the judgments continue to unfold, the direction of what is happening begins to narrow. What first appeared as disruption across the earth now moves with purpose toward a single outcome. The events are no longer only affecting the world broadly, they are drawing its powers into alignment with something specific. The scriptures describe a gathering, but not one formed through peace or agreement in the way such things are usually understood. This gathering is not presented as a solution to what is happening. It is part of the progression itself. The same forces that have exercised authority, enforced allegiance, and resisted what is true are brought together into one place. This movement is not accidental, it is directed. The kings of the earth, who have already been shown to operate within the system, are now drawn into a unified position. What was once spread across nations and regions begins to converge. Authority that had been distributed is now focused. The language used to describe this gathering reveals that it is not based on clear understanding or willing submission to truth. It is driven by influence that leads toward a specific end. Those who are gathered are not stepping into clarity. They are being drawn into a final alignment that reflects what has already been established in them. This is consistent with the pattern that has been present from the beginning. What is internal becomes external. What has been accepted inwardly now determines outward action. The gathering does not create a new condition. It reveals what is already there. At the same time, the place of gathering is identified. It is not left undefined or symbolic without reference. It is presented as a real location, one that becomes the center of what follows. This detail matters because it grounds the event in reality. What is taking place is not abstract. It occurs within the world, in a specific place, at a specific time. As the nations are gathered, the structure of the system is still present. The man remains at the center. Authority is still exercised. The progression has not reversed. Instead, it has moved forward into its final stage. The purpose of this gathering becomes clearer as the description continues. It is not for negotiation. It is not for resolution. It is for confrontation. This is the point where everything that has been building, every layer of influence, structure, authority, and enforcement comes together. The system that has developed across the earth now stands unified, not in peace, but in opposition. This opposition is not directed toward one another. It is directed toward something beyond them. The scriptures show that what is taking place is leading toward a direct encounter. The powers of the earth, having been shaped and aligned through the progression, now stand together at the edge of something they do not control. There is a shift here that must be understood. Up to this point, the system has acted, enforced, and controlled within its sphere. Now it is being brought into a position where it will face something outside of that control. The gathering is not for its benefit. It is for its exposure. The same authority that allowed the system to rise has now drawn it into a place where it will be answered. This reveals that the progression has always been moving toward this moment. The development of the system, the rise of the man, the enforcement of allegiance, the resistance of those who would not bow, and the judgments that followed, all of it leads here. Nothing in the pattern is disconnected. As the nations gather, the illusion of independent control reaches its peak. The system stands unified, structured, and prepared, yet it is standing at the threshold of something it cannot withstand. The tension at this stage is not between nations. It is between what has been established on the earth and what is about to confront it. This is the final alignment before the outcome is revealed. The gathering is complete. The powers are in place. The system stands together. And what follows is not another stage of development. It is the end of what has been built. The end of the man and his kingdom. The gathering does not lead to negotiation, and it does not result in a prolonged conflict between equal powers. What has been built on the earth, though vast in reach and unified in structure, does not meet its end through gradual collapse or internal division. It comes to an end through direct intervention. The scriptures describe the return of the one whose authority was never replaced, though it had been rejected. This return is not presented as hidden or uncertain. It is visible, decisive, and final. The same world that had been brought into alignment under the system now witnesses something it cannot absorb, redirect, or resist. The man who stood at the center of that system does not maintain his position. His authority, though exercised across nations and enforced through power and deception, is brought to an immediate end. There is no extended struggle described, no exchange that places him on equal ground with what confronts him. The outcome is direct. He is taken. The one who worked alongside him, who directed allegiance and enforced participation, is taken with him. This detail is important because it shows that the system does not unravel piece by piece at this stage. Its central figures are removed together. What held the structure in its final form is dealt with at once. The description of their end is not symbolic or uncertain. They are cast into the lake of fire. This is presented as a final and irreversible judgment. There is no continuation of their role beyond this point. What they represented, what they enforced, and what they stood for is brought to a complete end. At the same time, the forces that were gathered with them do not continue in their alignment. The outcome of the confrontation extends beyond the central figures to those who stood within that system. The structure that had been unified does not remain standing after this moment. This reveals something that has been building from the beginning. The system, though allowed to develop, was never without limit. Its authority, though extensive, was never ultimate. When it reaches the point of confrontation, it does not sustain itself. The return that brings this end also reveals the difference between what appeared to be authority and what truly is. The man exalted himself, declared his position, and enforced allegiance, but his authority depended on what had been given to him for a time. When that time ends, so does his rule. There is no indication that his position is transferred or continued in another form. It ends where it is judged. This moment also answers the tension that has been present throughout the progression. The system required allegiance, enforced participation, and opposed those who would not align. It appeared to stand without challenge, yet its end shows that its foundation was never secure. The same applies to those who were drawn into it. The alignment that was enforced outwardly is exposed when the system itself is removed. What was built does not remain once its center is gone. This is not a reset of the same structure. It is a conclusion. The language used does not leave room for continuation in the same form. The man is not displaced and replaced. The system is not adjusted and sustained. What has been built reaches its end. At this point, the pattern that began with influence and developed into a global structure has completed its course. The spirit that was already at work prepared the way. The system formed and extended its reach. The man stood at its center. The second figure enforced its demands. The world was drawn into alignment, and resistance was met with pressure. All of it led here. And here it stops. The end of the man is the end of the system in its final form. What remains is not a continuation of what was, but something entirely different. The scriptures do not leave the outcome in silence. They move forward from this point, not back into the same pattern, but into what follows after its removal. This is where the story changes completely. What remains when it is over? When the man is removed and the system that carried him comes to its end, the world does not return to what it was before. The progression that began with influence and developed into a structure has run its full course, and what remains is not a weakened version of it, but its absence. What stood at the center is gone, and with it, the form that shaped authority, allegiance, and daily life is no longer in place. This is where the pattern fully breaks. Up to this point, everything has moved forward in continuity. One stage led into another, each building on what came before. Even the judgments did not immediately remove the system, they exposed it while it continued to operate. But now, there is a separation. What has been judged does not continue. The removal of the man and the one who worked with him leaves no central figure to hold the structure together. The authority that had been concentrated in them does not pass into another within the same system. It ends where it is judged. This is what makes this moment different from every stage before it. It is not a transition within the system, it is the end of it. The effects of this are not limited to leadership. The system reached into every part of life: belief, authority, commerce, and daily function. With its center removed, those connections no longer operate in the same way. What was once enforced is no longer sustained. What was once required is no longer upheld by the same power. This does not mean that everything immediately becomes clear or restored in a single moment. The scriptures do not present it that way. What they show is that the structure which defined the world in its final stage is no longer present. The condition that remains is no longer shaped by that system. This is where the distinction between what was temporary and what is lasting becomes visible. Throughout the progression, the system appeared stable. It carried authority, controlled participation, and shaped how people lived. Yet its stability was dependent on something that had been given for a time. When that time ended, everything connected to it ended with it. What remains is not built on that foundation. This reveals something that was present from the beginning but not fully seen. The authority of the system, though real in its operation, was limited. It functioned within boundaries that it did not set and could not extend. When those boundaries are reached, it does not adapt or continue, it stops. At the same time, those who remained aligned with what is true are no longer positioned under the same pressure that defined the previous stage. The system that opposed them, restricted them, and moved against them is no longer active in that form. The conflict that marked that period does not continue in the same way. This does not erase what occurred. The progression still stands as it happened. But it no longer defines what comes next. The shift here is not only in structure but in direction. What follows is not another development of the same pattern, it is something that stands apart from it. The scriptures move forward from this point with a different emphasis. The focus is no longer on what rises against what is true, but on what is established in its place. The pattern of opposition gives way to a pattern of establishment. This is why the end of the man is not simply the conclusion of a conflict. It is the removal of everything that sustained that conflict in its final form. What remains is not shaped by deception, enforcement, or resistance. Those elements belong to what has already been judged. The progression that follows is not built on what was removed. It is built on what was always true, now no longer opposed in the same way. This is where the story turns completely, not back, but forward. The kingdom that does not end. When the man is removed and the system that carried him comes to its end, the world does not return to what it was before. The long progression that began with an unseen spirit, grew into a visible structure, and reached its full expression through centralized authority and enforced worship, does not continue in another form. It is concluded. What remains is not a weakened version of what was. It is not another cycle. It is the absence of what had been built, and the presence of what had always been true, now revealed without opposition. The scriptures turn from what was temporary to what is established beyond interruption. The one who returns does not come to claim authority as though it had never been his. He comes to exercise what was always his, now no longer resisted, denied, or replaced. The authority he bears is not granted in that moment, it is eternal. It was never truly lost, only rejected by those who exalted themselves in its place. This is the great difference between what was built and what remains. What was built depended on permission. It rose for a time, functioned within limits, and ended when that time was complete. What now stands is not described within those limits. It is not given for a season and then removed. It is established without end. The language used to describe this kingdom reflects that distinction. It is not presented as fragile or conditional. It is not dependent on alliances, signs, or enforcement. It does not require deception to persuade or systems to maintain participation. It stands on what is true, and its authority is not contested in the way the previous system was. This does not mean that what came before had no real effect. It shaped the world. It enforced allegiance. It brought many into alignment with what was false. It opposed and overcame the saints. It shed the blood of those who remained faithful. But its end reveals that its foundation was never lasting. It could not continue once the time given to it was complete. In contrast, what is now established is not described as passing away. It is not presented as something that will be replaced or overtaken. It is set in place as the final authority. This is where the distinction between appearance and reality is fully resolved. The man exalted himself and claimed a position that did not belong to him. He enforced that claim through power and deception, and for a time, it was accepted. But his end showed that his authority was not his own to keep. The kingdom that follows does not claim what is not its own. It is not established through assertion or maintained through force in the same way. It stands because it is rightful, not because it is enforced. This changes everything about what remains. The structure that once required alignment is no longer present. What stands does not depend on the same mechanisms. The need for enforced participation, controlled commerce, and directed allegiance is no longer described. The system that required those things has already been removed. What replaces it is not described through the same lens. It is described as enduring, as unshaken, as not passing away. This is why the progression ends here and does not return to what came before. There is no indication that the pattern of deception, rise, enforcement, and judgment begins again. What has been established stands without that cycle. The movement of the scriptures from beginning to end shows this clearly. What begins with the presence of truth, moves through rejection and substitution, and ends with restoration does not loop back into the same condition. It resolves. This is the final answer to everything that has unfolded. The Spirit that worked through many. The system that formed across the earth. The woman who rode in luxury and pride. The man who exalted himself as God. The second figure who enforced the mark and the image. The resistance of those who would not bow. The judgments that exposed the limits of human power. The gathering of nations against Jerusalem. The destruction of the woman. The fall of the beast and the false prophet. All of it led to this point, and at this point, it does not continue in the same way. It stands. The kingdom that remains is not one among others. It is not part of the pattern. It is the end of it, and it does not end.